I'll call the meeting to order.
Meeting has been posted according to open meeting laws.
Roll call.
Trustee Alexander. Here. All right. Trustee Nugent. Here. Trustee Johnson. Here. Trustee Renucci.
Here.
Trustee Smalley. Here. Trustee Wisniewski. Here. Thank you.
President Seeger is excused. Do citizen participation per Village Resolution 2017-01. Anyone wishing to address the Village Board during citizen participation will be allowed 5 minutes. Your subject can be anything, whether on the agenda or not. The Village Board should not engage in a discussion regarding comments because it was not part of the publicly noticed agenda. Upon conclusion of the citizen participation segment, members of the audience are not allowed further comment unless they're participating in a public hearing or if specifically allowed by a majority vote of the Village Board due to involvement in an agenda item. No? Going once? Going twice? All right. Close citizen participation. Move on to consent agenda. One motion and a second will approve all of the following items. Any item may be pulled from the list and voted on separately.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Miscellaneous business. Item 1, budget review session. Review a 5-year capital improvement plan and financial management plan. Capital improvement plan and then a presentation from Ellers.
Good evening, everybody. I'm John Cameron with Ellers, and I'm going to be walking through the presentation and the packet with you this evening. My colleague Brian Raymer, who was at your June meeting, is out of the office this week, so I will be kind of walking through the updates that were made since your last meeting. So just kind of talking off of the PowerPoint presentation that's in your packet and then referencing the tables that go along with the presentation here as well. Really, I'll very briefly kind of recap some of the items that you talked about at your last meeting as it pertains to equalized value projections, your current debt position, and fund balance position, and then spend a little bit more time talking through some of the changes that were made since your June meeting in terms of the updated capital improvement plan that you had provided to us to update in this analysis, and then talk about what's next. So on page 3 of the PowerPoint presentation, in terms of the future value projection, which refers to Table 1 on the packet, just a reminder that you did close Tax Increment District number 3, which does impact your 2023 budget year, both from a debt side as well as from a one-time levy limit adjustment that the village is allowed to take, which equates to just over $100,000. So that's something more on the operation side in terms of the levy limit adjustment, but an option that you have available to you come budget time here. In terms of the numbers and projections going forward, there is an assumed 2.29% annual inflation beyond what's planned for or shown with the tax increment closures in terms of kind of year-over-year growth to both your TID in and your TID out equalized values. So when we talk about your TID out, so that would be the total equalized value in the village less the increment that is contained within your tax increment finance districts. That is what is used to calculate the mill rate on an annual basis. Your TID in value is the total equalized value in the village, so it's inclusive of everything within your tax increment districts plus all of your other equalized value outside of your tax increment districts. And when we talk about long-term financial management planning, that really goes to speak to your overall general obligation debt capacity. So general obligation debt capacity in the state of Wisconsin is limited to no more than 5% of your total equalized value. And I know you've got some internal goals that we'll talk about here this evening in terms of keeping your debt capacity at around 50% of your total capacity. So instead of 5%, you're looking at 2.5%. Moving on to the next page, in terms of just your current debt position, again, this really hasn't changed since last time. Just a reminder that you do have debt dropping off associated with Tax Incremental Finance District number 3 going into next year. And then the tax levy for debt, the existing tax levy for debt between this year and 2025 increases by about $18,500 per year. So, that is your existing debt, and we've got that certainly built into the long-term plan. And then you also have debt associated with Tax Increment District number 4 that we are showing as part of the annual abatements, meaning you have your total general obligation debt, and then you have part of those portions of debt that are abated by your tax increment districts as well as by the water utility. So the portion that is your total less your abatement sources, that's what's carried through the property tax levy. And Tax Increment District number 4 does start in terms of increased debt service payments going into next year, and then really starts to jump in 2024, and some of that going into really 2025. We're projecting at this point a positive surplus within the district where you'd have the ability to carry that debt. Portion of that 2024 debt, I think, remains to be seen yet in terms of the ability for that tax increment district to carry 100% of what is shown to be assigned to its debt service payment. So something to monitor going forward. Moving on to page 5 in terms of total fund balance position. At the end of 2021, again, this is kind of a recap from last time, you had total fund balance of approximately $2.9 million, of which $2.1 million, a little over $2.1 million is assigned. That was down a little bit at year end due to the Square project and awaiting grant funds that came in thereafter. And then you also have another item to point out is there was $350,000 that was reserved in your capital fund balance for the Highway 20 water improvement project, and that was reallocated to another project within your capital improvement plan, kind of based on the health of the water utility.
What happens when this $750,000 is paid back? What changes here?
Your fund balance would increase. Moving on to the next page. So really kind of highlighting some of the changes that Brian had made since your last meeting, and I think that's really highlighted in the packet on page 3 of the tables. There are items that are highlighted in orange in terms of the projects that were changed in your capital improvement plan that we then updated in terms of the financing plan. There were some fire and EMS projects that are to be paid with your annual levy amount within the village. You have 5 projects that are now identified from future grants and aids that are included in the capital improvement plan. You have that $350,000 that was reallocated from the Highway 20 water projects to the impoundment redevelopment project to reduce the borrowing for that particular item. There were a number of projects that were moved back a year. And then really in terms of the 22 capital improvement projects, that's a solved amount to match to the annual amount that you levy for capital on an annual basis of $419,500. One thing to point out is that the projects that are shown to be funded via the annual levy between 2023 and 2026 average approximately just over $430,000 a year. So you do have, some overages over and above what you currently levy at that $419,500. So something to consider is looking at whether your assigned future fund balance might bridge the gap in terms of if you have a difference between what you're levying annually and where your actual projects that you're planning to actually fund via the levy. Looking at applicable fund balance in those particular years to kind of keep that levy amount stable over time. And certainly if you have any, increases in net new construction that you consider allocating within your levy amount that you consider allocating towards capital improvement projects, then you might be able to realize that increase there as well.
Real quick, what's the total 2023 debt issuance amount?
So the total 2023 debt issuance amount in the packet is $1,525,000, broken between the levy and the water. But this afternoon we did notice within the water portion there was $480,000 that was added for the Route 20 water main project. That was not included in the financing. So that financing would need to increase to a little over $2 million in 2023. So that's something we'll update and provide back after this meeting. And that would affect just the water portion. So that would not affect, the portion that would be carried and repaid through the property tax levy.
But is the assumption that will be general obligation debt, not revenue?
At this point, yes, and we could talk about that in terms of the plan, where that puts you relative to your total general obligation debt capacity. Certainly within the water utility portion, bumping that over $1 million, you now would be, in the realm where you could consider issuing a standalone water revenue bonds for those two, or for those series of projects. And that, would be something that would be attractive out in the open market. Also, anytime you're issuing more than one issue, different types of securities, certainly you have two sets of issuance expenses. Utility revenue bonds are a little bit more costly than general obligation debt. In that, number one, their security is generally, a step lower than general obligation debt, which is backed by an irrepealable property tax levy from the purchaser's side of things on the underwriting side. It also comes with its own, obviously, set of issuance expenses as you go through the transaction, as well as a debt service reserve, which is generally equal to 1 year's worth of principal and interest expense that usually gets built into the debt offering as well. So those are all things to consider.
Do we need to be planning for a rate case then, with given over $1 million in capital for the water?
I think that's something we can evaluate here, whether that is warranted or not within the utility in terms of standalone debt capacity. Right now, you're just over 1 times total coverage. So when you look at coverage being your total revenues coming into the utility less your total expenses, including your payment in lieu of taxes, that net amount that you would be left with once you pay your operating expenses being at least 1 times or more, ideally more than 1 times the total annual debt service payments. Putting you below 1 times coverage would tell you that you are losing money on an annual basis. Being above 1 times coverage tells you that you're in the black. And right now, before that additional debt would be added in 2026, kind of your low water mark, you'd be at just over 1 times coverage, 1.03. So When you add in that additional debt, it's possible that that puts you right at break even or just below. So it might necessitate a rate case, but I think certainly, to the extent that you can qualify and put yourself in a position for simplified increases, you might be able to kind of bridge the gap to the extent you can take advantage of those over the next several years.
So we did a rate case, and since Wisconsin is typically a forward-looking rate case state, it's not historic-looking, that us a better rate on those revenue bonds, and that we've got a rate case backing that up?
You'd need to have the new rates in effect prior to the issuance of the debt in order to have the underwriting community really look at that in any real positive light. So coverage is also based on your most recent audit year in terms of revenues and expenses. So to the extent you'd have a rate case, you'd want that rate case in effect, and you'd want to be able to see the results of that from your financial statements. So that, that takes some time, obviously. Any other questions before we keep moving on? The other item in terms of the borrowing, and I'm in the packet on table 4, in addition to the borrowing for 2023, there's also general obligation notes that are shown in 2025 for $890,000, of which approximately $295,000 is levy, $270,000 would be allocated to the water utility, and $325,000 would be allocated to the sewer utility. So, another thing to consider back to the question on the rate case is knowing you have some capital. Obviously your larger pieces of capital are in this potential 2023 borrowing, but you also have, additional capital expenses coming up in terms of a borrowing in 2025. So it might be that, you've got a conventional rate case in between now and then that, if you take advantage of, you'd have the ability to show, certainly within your financial statements. If you look at, in terms of the tables, going on to table 7, that shows the financing plan tax impact analysis for the your existing debt plus the new debt that's planned to be taken on, and really what does that impact does that have on the overall property tax rate within the village. I think at the last meeting, what Brian had shown is that you kind of maxed out at $1.25 per thousand in terms of total tax rate for debt between what you currently have plus those future debt offerings. With the updates that you've made to the capital improvement plan, that comes down to 86 cents per thousand. So kind of walking from left to right on that worksheet, you have your total existing payments on the far left-hand side. You have the abatement sources in terms of the water utility, the last portion of debt allocated to TID 3 after this year, and then TID 4 debt, as well as your premium deposits to the debt service fund from your existing debt offerings that go to help pay interest expense in 22, 23, and 2024. So currently in 2022, you have an existing tax rate for debt on an equalized basis of 69 cents per thousand, and that goes up to 73 cents and then starts to come back down, and certainly starts to come back down more dramatically after 2026. When you look at the new debt being added in, total principal and interest payments for your 2023 debt issue, and then the 2025 general obligation notes, less the portions that are allocated to the water and sewer utility, you go from 73 cents per thousand. If you look at kind of the third column from the right in orange, where you start at 69 cents, you go up to 73 cents in 2023. You would go up to 86 cents per thousand, assuming that 2.29% growth rate in those future years, and then start to come back down really after 2028. So you come back down to about 68 cents per thousand. So certainly is less than what you were shown last time with the updates that you made to the capital improvement plan, but there still is an increase to the overall debt service levy over where it is right now. You also have a slight increase to your existing debt levy that obviously factors into these numbers as well. So from a future debt standpoint, really you don't gain additional debt service levy capacity until 2028, when your existing debt that's being carried through the property tax levy really starts to drop. So when you talk about future debt offerings beyond what might be shown here in your capital improvement plan, really starting to feather that in after 2027 would give you kind of the smoothest overall increase to your tax rate associated with that. And kind of that impact for a property owner with a home valued at $200,000, you see a $36 bump between 2023 and 2024. And a little bit of an increase again in 2020.
Those aren't compounding increases.
Correct, right, correct. The other piece of it to discuss is what does the financing plan, the impact, what sort of impact does it have on your overall general obligation debt capacity? So again, that's, that 5% of your total equalized value is what you're limited to in terms of the amount of general obligation borrowing capacity that you have. Right now, you're right at 50%, at the end of 2022, you'll be at about 44% of your total borrowing capacity. And new equalized values are coming out this week. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was just thinking about that. We received our preliminary, and the statement of changes showed a 13% increase for the village.
So really, fantastic change in terms of equalized value, and certainly that, we can update within these numbers here, as that, I think, just came out this morning. A positive change. So that will also have an impact in terms of your general obligation borrowing capacity. But prior to the change, you're at about 44% at the end of the year after you make your principal payments for 2022. And really, as you start to add new debt in, with the 2023 debt, you'd be at approximately 48% of your total debt limit, but that's before adding that $480,000 associated with the Route 20 project in the capital improvement plan. So adding that would put you right at 50% of your total debt capacity. Now, the bump in equalized value will likely bring you, down a little bit. So that's a positive. But what it shows is that preliminarily, you at least could consider doing the water portions of your capital improvement project or capital improvement plan with your general obligation debt issue next year. But certainly, you could certainly reserve the right to issue, standalone water revenue bonds. So what we could do is, build a sizing of a standalone water revenue bond so that you could see kind of preliminarily on a planning stage what the difference would be in terms of annual principal and interest payments, total size, because again, the size will be larger with a standalone revenue bond versus including those projects within your general obligation debt offering, because again, it's a separate transaction with its own set of issuance expenses. It also comes with that debt service reserve requirement, which equals approximately 1 year's worth of debt service payments. But we can see kind of a side-by-side coming into your next meeting here to see what sort of impact that might have and what sort of coverage ability do you have within your existing water rates to handle a standalone revenue bond on the water side. So I think, the positive for the village is that you do have options in terms of, the water projects within your debt offering. You could certainly include it within your general obligation debt issuance here in 2023. But, provided we've got adequate debt coverage, you certainly could consider a standalone utility revenue issue and preserve that GO debt capacity for other projects that might be coming down the pipeline, no pun intended. So, my crude attempt at humor for the night. So beyond that, I think that kind of highlights some of the changes for the meeting between, from your last meeting to now. In terms of really what's next, as I said, we'll make that update to the debt sizing with the additional water project for Route 20, and we can do a side-by-side comparison between general obligation debt offering and a standalone water revenue bond for consideration here. And then my understanding is you will be kind of moving forward with the operating portion of the financial management plan. And when, Brian gets back, he'll certainly be continuing to lead you through that effort, with kind of the goal, obviously, for your operating budget board meeting here in September, and then obviously your public hearing coming up at the beginning of November.
Go to table 3, please. So I think, Jason, update them with, I was looking at the fire capital, all the building costs. That's last week or here. Let's add that. I guess what I was trying to play, Eileen kicked out to Excel for me. I was trying to play with it. You get me in your updated version, copy just in Excel. And could you, like if something is multi-year, could you make it multi-lined as opposed to columns? Because then I can pivot this a lot easier. It jumped out at me like on some of the general obligation where we were targeting. It was a lot easier for me to kind of, that was the one piece. I couldn't get the year-over-year view, putting a significant amount of effort in.
I'll speak for Brian. He can make any updates that you want. He's not here tonight, so it's much easier for me to... Sure. I could promise all sorts of things. What else did you want?
That's fantastic. Yeah, that'd be helpful if we could break it down like that. And then, I mean, the rest of the day was really good. It was that year over year that was difficult. And then the other question, I guess, Eileen, is, are we purposefully not projecting anything on the library?
As far as capital? Well, are you talking about like the potential for a new building? So that would be a lease. So there wouldn't be capital unless they buy some furnishings.
Got it. Okay. That'd be hundreds of thousands of dollars, hopefully. I like these chairs, but And then I guess for Jason or Jeremy, is there anything else that's in here that we need to add or change, or you guys, or any concerns that you have?
Only question, and John, maybe you can address this. I see the baseball fields for 128. I didn't get the chance to talk with Vicky today about that. Do you know what that was, what that entailed for 128?
Is that possible, improving the fencing, the enclosures?
The fencing's all been redone though.
It's updated?
She sent me a breakdown.
Okay.
Okay, here's your breakdown. Seed and topsoil, 12,000, bleachers, 17,500, bedding, 70,000, infield maintenance, 2,500, safety surface under play structure, 20,000. Want me to forward you the email?
Into the netting business. And then these that are projected as grants, if we don't get these, is that deferring those projects? Any concerns there?
That's how I see it going. I mean, Tim and I had a real high-level conversation about grants, and we're gonna have to be watching for those opportunities, but, that's how I see it. If we don't have the grant funding, the projects get kicked out.
Last Thursday, I met with, this is regarding the radio project. As you know, we have to buy all new mobile and portable radios when in 2024. I met with the salesman for the radios, cost Thursday, and came in a lot higher than what we were told to budget for starting. I'm looking at probably an extra 20 to 20 total.
That was, actually added to the numbers. Brian had to make a modification after we spoke. So
Okay.
we added $10,000 to each year to 2023.
Okay.
20,000 Jeremy's mentioning is accounted for in what you received
Okay.
tonight.
Yeah, well, the fire departments are more expensive.
Just on that note too, Public Works may want to get on this radio thing as well. Now, obviously, it's going to be much less of an investment for us, probably just 5 or 6 handhelds, but I think that's something I want to pursue as well.
I have that information for you, a pared down radio, and then I have his business card.
I'm done monopolizing everybody's time. Other questions?
I just had a question on the table 8, so just for my clarification, so the projected equalized value for 2021, 428, 2022 is 440. So Eileen, you said it went up 12%, 2022, or?
The equalized value went up 13%. Preliminary number that we received today, we don't get final numbers. So is it like, I think that we get them? Yeah. So the statement of changes showed a 13%. Sellers always does a conservative projection for increases because of these small increases as well.
Yeah, we've had a great run here recently, a lot of, most municipalities across the state, but it doesn't take too long in our memory bank to go back to some of those very low growth years or very stagnant years in terms of growth projections, so.
When was that? Like 2009, 2008?
Well, even coming off of, 2000 to 2012, 2013 kind of time frame, yep.
And I think ours were pretty small, actually, 2020. We're just seeing even our net new construction, it went up slightly, but it still is not where it was. I think next year it will be because we're seeing a lot of
So the 13% applies to 2022? '22? Okay. That number, the 440, would be higher than that.
Any other questions? have one of these updates this week.
I think just with the updated numbers for the debt, there were no changes tonight. So unless we get some other change, like if the building costs for EMS are more, we'll incorporate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the time. Have a good evening.
Okay, we'll move on to the second item on the agenda, preliminary direction to staff on 2023 operations budget. Eileen?
Okay, so we always kind of kick off the operating portion of the budget, asking the board if they have any direction regarding service levels, either some sort of increase in service levels or decrease in service levels that you would like to see. So I guess if there's something that you're wondering why we're not providing or you want staff to look into, now's the time to. So moving on to the next topic, then we always seek direction from the board for the wage assumptions to incorporate in the operations budget. Obviously, this is preliminary and subject to change and not a guarantee of any sort of increase. We currently have inserted 2.5% adjustments based on last year, but obviously with inflation, I don't think that is going to match what other entities are giving as increases this year. I'm seeing some chatter with the City Managers Association between 4% and 6% being considered, and then there's some outliers that are much higher and much lower. But that seems to be the majority of what I'm seeing. And obviously, we also have the salary market update this year as well. So what I'm proposing is increasing the assumptions in the budget because I don't think 2.5% is going to be sufficient. And then reserving some money in contingency for that market update, which is what I have done in the past. If we don't have the numbers for the market update and those final salaries that are approved by the board by budget time, then I do an amendment afterwards and reallocate. So I'm just looking for direction. I did show the ramifications. So the 2.5% assumptions that are currently in the budget, this does not include the police union, only those on the salary structure, result in a $42,000 increase in wage costs. Of that, $31,900 comes from the levy. 4% results in a $60,800 increase, and of that, $46,000 comes from the levy. Talking about that, obviously the concern with levy limits is that your levy increase doesn't cover your wage and benefit increases. It really never does. So last year our levy increased $9,000. That's the smallest year I've seen in a very long time. We'd been averaging in the 20s. I'm projecting this year the actual levy, without just taking the TID closure out of the equation, will increase around $17,000. Now with that TID closure, we will see that one-time levy increase, which then carries forward of about $100,000. That will help us in this year, but we have a lot of things competing. We are going to have the wage issue. We are going to have, I know EMS is looking at some pretty big increases in their operations costs due to some of the ways that they are operating and changing operations that I think are necessary. And then, of course, these capital items, and staffing needs. So that being said, does anybody have any input on those assumptions? Are you okay with me bumping that up to 4% in there? Knowing that we might have to make some other adjustments in the budget.
I would do 6.
I put down increase to 4, but be ready for 6.
I would just, so we were talking about doing conservative, with the conservative numbers with Allers. I would do 6. We see what the market study comes back with. We all know inflation. I mean, I think all experiencing it personally too. I think 4 is the bare minimum. And I think our number one challenge right now, and look at the services we provided, they provide it through labor. So we need to take care of them. Same thing what we're trying to do on the EMS side. Market study comes in then at 5, which I doubt it will. You got a market study, you put it at 5, and we adjust the budget. But, and I know there's competing stuff from the TID, but I think the worst position we could be in is losing talent.
Well, it's easier to adjust down than up.
I will have, Kathy work on changing that to 6%, initial assumptions.
Make sure I'm reading this. The 60,000 is fully loaded. Taxes.
That does not include increases in health insurance. What I include when I report that is any benefit that's directly associated with the wage rate, like your Social Security, Medicare, and your pension.
Any other questions or directions? Okay. Moving on, ordinances and resolutions. Ordinance 2022-09, amend the village's comprehensive plan by changing the land use classification of two properties, RLC 0002 and RLC 0003, from general commercial to general industrial. Applicant John Tyson, agent. Application 2022-22. So I will open public hearing. May have any comments? Seeing no takers, I will close the public hearing. Okay, we'll move on to possible action by village board.
I will make a motion to adopt the attached ordinance based on the finding included in the ordinance of the attachments of the public hearing and the draft ordinance dated June 27, 2022.
That would be ordinance 2022-09.
Yes.
Second. All right, we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. On to reports. Emergency services, June 14th and special, June 22nd. Any questions for Jason? No? Okay. All right, moving on to Booth Lake Memorial Park minutes, for May and from June. Questions for Joe?
How's your planning going for your 100th anniversary?
Good, yeah, we have meetings every week, so the event is on Friday, starts at 3:30. So the park will be open till Friday and Saturday, so there's...
Did they get the electrical question settled out as far as the available electricity for different vendors and?
So the electrical should have been done in the pavilion, the new pavilion, on
Right.
Monday, today, should be done today. Everything should be set.
Questions? All right, administrator's report. Questions for Eileen? Just disappointed to see that our room equipment won't be.
Not all of it, just your Creston device. You knew that.
I know. All right, any other comments or questions for Eileen? Okay. We'll make a motion to adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 1985-1E for the purpose of conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, pending developments and development agreement. Roll call.
President Johnson. Trustee Alexander. Trustee Nugent. Trustee Renucci.
Yes.
Trustee Smalley. Trustee Wisniewski.